Passion for Leicestershire.
BBC Radio Leicester.
Now, it's at 7 minutes past 12. Whether you've had it, whether you'd like to have it, or whether you just would steer clear of it all, we've all got something to say on plastic surgery. It's easy to assume getting some work done is all down to vanity, but the desire to have it is often the result of self-confidence, maybe a birth defect, an extensive burn or another damaged part of the body, which can sometimes be associated with the psychological side effects. Now, back in September, Leicester hospitals held an annual examination for the first time, which determines whether a plastic surgeon is ready to become a consultant too. So is there an increase in people inquiring? Well, with me in the studio is Graham Offer, a consultant plastic surgeon at Leicester Royal Infirmary. And nice to see you.
Nice to meet you, Jonathan.
Now, what made you decide to go into plastic surgery?
Cool. It's a fantastically interesting career to go into.
Yeah.
If you're a doctor. I mean, obviously, I originally for many years I wanted to be a doctor, and then when I started in my training, I came across plastic surgery and realised all of the things you could do with it, and there
kind of
I
went
am.
from there.
Yeah. So. I mean, it started off with we'd been finding a book in the library called Plastic Surgery of the Face by Harold Gillies, which was written after the First World War, and it was all the pictures of the guys that had been hit by shrapnel and things in the trenches.
Yeah.
And plastic surgery really, as a real major specialty, started after that. So it was all reconstructing their faces, building them noses out, bits of rib and forehead and bits of skin graft and flaps of skin. So I looked at that and I thought that was fascinating. And then when I got to the plastic surgery part of my medical school training, I really liked it, and then gradually specialised in that over the years. So.
I mean, it is fascinating, and it's been referred to as many different things. I mean, we're talking about it today as plastic surgery, but it's also been referred to as cosmetic surgery, hasn't it? And I guess that's to do with more of the boom in people who decide that they're not happy with their overall appearance in some way, shape or form, therefore want to employ the likes of a plastic surgeon to make that change.
Yeah, I mean, it's a. From one end, you would have a patient who most people would consider has a deformity, and the other end of the spectrum, you have a patient who maybe many people would think don't have a deformity, but they're unhappy with their appearance in the way they look. So you have this. Somewhere in the middle, you have certain procedures where some people would say, "Oh no, that's definitely cosmetic," and another person would say, "No, that's sort of reconstructive or plastic." So, so, for example, if you have someone who has born with a cleft lip, then most people would say, "Well, that's a reconstructive issue," and you have someone who's aged and has got a saggy face, well, that's normal, and if they want to look better, it's a facelift, which is a cosmetic procedure. And then in the middle you have variations, so a breast reduction could be cosmetic if the breast isn't particularly big, just more of almost an uplift, or it could be a big quality of life issue if someone's got a 3 kilogram breast on each side, which you can get. So
it always makes me laugh that the association that looks after plastic surgery, and when we talk about breasts, it's called BAPS, which it can't be the first time somebody said, that's made them giggle, that it's called BAPS. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating. So do you do both then, Graham? Do you do reconstructive surgery and surgery for people who maybe psychological effects or through accident or something like that, as well as people who simply want to look better?
Absolutely, yeah. But most of my reconstructive work would be in the NHS, the Royal Infirmary. The aesthetic work is really all the cosmetic stuff is really private, because obviously the NHS isn't going to pay for that.
No.
So it's quite a skewed practice where I do sort of one thing in one sector and one in the other. But the skills that you have for each help each one, you see. So if you can do a nice cosmetic procedure, you can usually do quite a nice reconstructive.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's been a lot of debate about what forms of plastic surgery should be on the NHS and what forms should be paid for privately. So, for example, there's been that case, I think her name's Josie Cunningham, the woman who decided that she wanted to have her boobs made bigger on the NHS and all the rest of it. But then you've got the other side, and this is something that I've been fascinated by as well, is that someone who has put themselves on a diet, a real crash diet, maybe they've been quite morbidly obese, they've lost lots of weight, they've done it in a short period of time, they're left with lots of loose skin. Now, I know people who've had that done via the NHS. In particular, there was one person who the doctor recommended it on the NHS because they said that actually you'd saved the health service so much money in the long run because you were now fitter and healthier than you would have done had you been obese and been in and out of the hospital and that kind of thing. So who makes the decisions over what can be done on the NHS and what will have to be done privately?
At the minute, it's the commissioning groups. The way the NHS is set up is that the budget is held by one sort of part of it, and then they buy services from different places. So the commissioning groups in each area decide on what are the most important health issues for their population, and then they fund each thing. So there are certain guidelines laid down some years ago. The British Association of Plastic Surgeons worked with the NHS Modernisation Agency some years ago, and they produced a document called Action on Plastic Surgery. And what that did is it looked at sort of evidence-based guidelines as to what would be considered a sort of cosmetic thing and what would be considered more reconstructive. And it laid down. So, for example, if someone had lost 10 stone, and then they were left with huge amounts of loose skin, then they might qualify to have an abdominoplasty or a tummy tuck. And same with the size of breast that qualifies for breast reduction. And then since then, each of the commissioning groups has adjusted it to fit their local population, so that you do find... So in some areas of the country, there is still a bit of a postcode lottery as to what can and can't be done.
Yes, someone will get something on the NHS.
I mean, in general, breast augmentation is basically not allowed anywhere now. So that the cases like you mentioned are now becoming increasingly rare.
I think the only time it is ever referred up is in cases of like chronic back pain, or it's putting pressure on the discs.
For breast reduction, that would be. For breast augmentation, ladies can have breast augmentation under certain special circumstances. So, for example, if one breast is much, much bigger than the other by at least 2 or 3 cup sizes, and then you could put an implant in the smaller one to make it bigger, or you might do better actually making the bigger one a bit smaller to get the symmetry. So
I find it absolutely
Like
fascinating. I'm so glad you're here this afternoon because I do find the subject genuinely really, really... I mean, I've not had, as you can tell, although I should have shaved this morning, you could have seen my natural beauty. I'm shaven. However, I've never had it, but I have never ruled it out either. It's one of those things that I will make a decision when that time comes, or as and when that time comes, although the idea of a tummy tuck sounds incredibly interesting, I've got to say. If you've got a question for Graham, if you're considering some plastic surgery and you just want a little bit of information, obviously he can't give a consultation because you're on the end of a radio, okay? So he can't quite see. But if you're thinking about having something done, or you want a bit of peace of mind about it, or you want a little bit of information about the kind of things that you could have done, then take full advantage of him while Graham's in the studio with me. The telephone number to call in on is 0116 251 1049. That's 0116 251 1049. You can also text me as well, and text in on H1333 and start your text message with the word Leicester. Now, we talk about some of the most common forms there of plastic surgery. We talked about breast augmentation, tummy tucks, that kind of thing, some facelifts. But there are obviously still cases where people, through no fault of their own, have either been born with a defect or something they want corrected, or indeed something's happened to them in life. So it could be anything from a broken nose to someone who's actually been involved in a car accident or a house fire or something like that. It must be a lot of pressure on you to get it right in those situations, because this person who's already perhaps psychologically affected by their look is placing themselves in your hands to get rid of that, and the last thing you want to do is make it look worse or to try and create something that they're not happy with. The consultation for that must be quite a long one, I would have thought, isn't it? Yeah,
generally. I mean, you have to be totally honest with everybody and go through what they can sort of expect and what they can't.
Yeah.
And it can be quite emotional going through things with them, because often they've got a lot of psychological, some of people with really bad trauma where you have a lot of psychological issues to go through. So you need to go through those. You might refer them to psychologists and things, and you need other people to help. Yeah. But then with the actual surgery, it's most surgeons will take a lot of pride in their work, in what they're really trying to do the best they possibly can to make it look as good as possible, and they'll do whatever they can to do that. And you just have to think of all the different options that you can apply to each patient given whatever reconstruction you're doing, and then go through it with them and say, well, we can build that, but we need to nick a bit of rib, therefore you'll have a scar there.
Wow.
Or we're going to move a bit of skin from this part of the body to another, so you'll get a scar like this. And think about the stages of the operation. So if you're rebuilding someone's nose, so say someone's had their nose completely destroyed, and there's a hole there. So you can do that, but you need to consider how you build a nose. So you split it up in your mind into lining, support and cover.
Right.
So then you'd maybe supply the support with a piece of rib graft, and then you might supply the cover by cutting on the forehead. There are some little blood vessels that go up from the centre of the forehead, which supply all the skin up to the scalp, up to the hair.
Yeah.
So you can take a sort of finger of tissue down, rotate it down, and put that over the rib.
Right.
And then you can use something else to line it, and then you've got a nose built out of their own tissue.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And the stage that you may have to have multiple stages. So once the skin has come down and it's sort of embedded into place and got its blood supply sorted, then you'd need to cut it away from where it came from, and you might need to put a bit of skin graft on the forehead where it came from if you need a big bit. And so there's all these things to think, and so you can end up with some procedures that might take 4 or 5 different goes just to get them right. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, as well, because the cosmetic industry, which is worth billions and billions of pounds every year, is going to great lengths to try and keep you out of business. I mean, all these creams that say that they can give you the appearance of a facelift. I don't know how true all of that is, but there's certainly a lot of things that are trying to prevent lines and wrinkles and that kind of stuff. But do you still see the bulk of your work being people who are concerned about lines and wrinkles and want to look younger? Was that where most of it comes from?
Well, there's several sort of parts of the cosmetic stuff. I mean, the anti-aging surgery, and then there's the weight loss surgery, and there's just people that aren't happy with, say, the size of their breasts and want to be bigger.
Yeah.
But a lot of certainly the aging stuff. So facelifts, blepharoplasty, which is bags,
right?
That sort of stuff is certainly increasing, because I think people are they're sort of giving themselves psychologically permission to have something done.
Yeah,
it may have bothered them for a long time, and years ago there was always a lot of stigma attached to cosmetic plastic surgery. So, well, why do you want to do that? But now most people, well, a lot of people will know somebody that's had something done for some reason, or of somebody if they don't know them themselves. So it's more acceptable socially to have things done. So I think people are coming forward more frequently.
Are the recovery times quicker as the science improves as well? I mean, you must be learning lots of new techniques and things.
Yeah, all the time. I mean, that's one of the great things about being a surgeon. You learn new things on each case. And then you apply them, and it's fantastic. I get paid and have a lovely time doing something doing something I enjoy. Yeah. I don't think I can be any luckier than that, really.
How do you react to the criticism that you're effectively playing God with some people's appearances, or that perhaps basically people should age gracefully, and somehow the plastic surgeon has forced people to think that not only do they need to do something about their looks, but now obviously you can do something about their looks?
I don't think that's the plastic surgeon. I think that's just the general sort of media and the society we live in. Yeah. There's lots of there's an awful lot of pressure on young women and on many people in the society to look a particular way. All of the chat magazines are always about some celebrity having something done. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the surgeon's fault. That's the way that the specialty has been kind of glamorized by the media. I think most reputable surgeons would, treat each person on their merits. They won't be pushing, advertising saying, "Oh, you must get your boobs done here, you'll be happy," and all this sort of thing. That's really unethical. You should, treat each patient, consult with them, usually at least twice. Make sure you understand exactly what they want and the reasons behind it, and try and advise them as a human being, as to whether or not this is something that would help them, or whether or not they're being unrealistic.
But is there? I mean, how much of the consultation is a sort of duty of care? I mean, if you sit there looking at someone and think, well, actually, you don't need all of this thing. They're saying, I want to have a smoother forehead, I want my eyes lifted, I want my chin brought back, and all that kind of stuff. Is there a part? Do you ever have to say, this is all too much?
I do. Yeah, because
and there must be people that want to repeat, because they say it's a bit like having a tattoo. Once you've had one thing done,
I think it depends, because different procedures have different effects. So, there are certain procedures that are extremely effective. So if someone has very large breasts and you reduce them from, a double G cup down to a D cup, it makes a massive difference in their quality of life. They no longer get backache, they don't get rashes under their breasts. It really changes them. You see them when they come in for the first consultation and they're sort of slouched over, wearing baggy clothes and leaning over, looking really down. And then when they come in afterwards, when it's all been done, they're much more confident, they feel better amongst themselves. So the effect on their psychology is huge. Now, some of them will then go on and have other procedures. And I think the ones that I think are probably more addictive to people are the sort of anti-aging things, because that's not if you've got big breasts, you make them smaller, it's a defined thing. But if you then go on and if you then age, you have a facelift or you have your eyes done, then you still age again. So 10 years on, you look a bit older again. And
they always say look at the hands, don't they? The back of the hands.
Well, yeah. Although there are procedures now for the back of the hand, you can inject fat into the back of the hands to make them look less wrinkly. So.
Programs like Embarrassing Bodies and There Was 10 Years Younger and all that kind of stuff, does that help the industry, or does that is there a bit of that that's
I think it can, but there's
surgery.
There's a sort of there's a line that you cross. Some of the things that what was the ones they did in America, the extreme makeovers.
Extreme makeover.
Those are. What they don't show you is when the veneers on the teeth fall off and the breast implant goes hard and needs to be replaced, and they've given it to someone that really hasn't got any money, and it puts them in a real position for the future.
I know it's a terrible thing to say, but with those extreme makeover programs, the old man sense that the wife goes off and she says she wants to look, she's 50 or whatever, and she wants to look like she's 20 again, and they create this very glamorous woman who looks nothing like she did previously, but goes back to the same old husband. And I always think he's got a good deal, because he's now got a woman who looks 10 years younger, 20 years younger, and she's got this old, what's her name, sitting in the sofa still, moaning and breaking wind and all the rest of it. You kind of think, hang on a minute, why has it gone that way round? Which brings me, I guess, to the question of, we've talked a lot about women, but the male cosmetic industry market and the male plastic surgery market, I mean, that's grown, hasn't it?
That's definitely grown. I mean, the main procedures that men like to have are things like gynecomastia reduction, which is man boobs.
Yeah.
Okay. And rhinoplasty, so nose jobs.
Right.
Those are probably the two biggest areas for men. Prominent ears, if the ears stick out.
Really?
That's popular. Less common to have facelifts and things. 95%, but still, even with men wanting more surgery, 95% of cosmetic surgery is for women.
Really?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
But I mean, with men being more in tune with their bodies and wanting to look good, and again, men now very much facing what women have faced in magazines and on TV and in popular culture, with the Adonis look, the six-pack, the abs, that kind of stuff. Are you seeing men who are wanting fat removed from their stomachs as well?
Some. Right. I mean, the key with all of this is to be realistic. They have to be realistic as to what's available. And one of the problems, as you've alluded to, is that a lot of the magazines and things that they read, they're looking to sell their magazine, so they're putting on things that look, fantastic.
Yeah.
Because people will, that looks interesting, and they'll pick it up and buy it. But that's not necessarily. There's not really a lot of evidence between for many of the things that they read in the back of magazines. So I do sometimes find that people have very unrealistic expectations. They bring in a magazine and they say, "Oh, look, this celebrity's had this done, and look, I can get a six-pack just from having a bit of fat shaped and this, that, and the other."
But that celebrity's probably got a personal trainer and
well, they may not,
exactly.
And there's always the photos might have been taken in a particular light,
airbrushed or whatever as well.
So exactly. I mean, they airbrush women who look pretty normal anyway, and they airbrush them down to look even more weird, more bizarre.
I mean, it must be also a very rewarding job when you sit back and you've just explain to me the myths. Is everyone always bandaged up to look like a mummy, or is that what we see on television? Does everyone always have that?
No, it's what you see on television.
It is, right, okay. So
pretty. I mean, for facelifts, people will have a sort of band round their face, but not really over their face, and they might have some cold packs on their eyes,
right?
But not like you see in the movies.
And also, the other thing is all plastic surgery done under general anaesthetic, or can some of it be done under local anaesthetic?
Some's under local, so removal of excess skin from the upper eyelids can be done under local. Okay. You shut your eyes and then you can pop it in and have it done that way. But a lot of the bigger stuff is general anaesthetic. You couldn't do it under local. Yeah,
it would just be too risky, I suppose.
And the patient probably wouldn't want it under local.
Exactly. And the other thing is that, as you say, with the sort of the rise of people wanting different things and all that kind of stuff, is there a point at which you can sort of go too far and you can start changing your look? We've seen that in Hollywood, haven't we, where people have had too much surgery and they start to actually, it's not just that they go back to looking how they used to look, they start to look like a different person altogether.
Yeah, that's awful when that happens. So, I mean, I think the most important thing is for the surgeon to be ethical and to advise the patient, as their doctor. And if they think they're doing something that is not going to work, it's going to make them look bizarre, then they need to tell them and refuse to do it. And I think that's so important. It's so easy if you're doing aesthetic surgery to the face to unbalance someone. So you do certain parts of the face but not others. And I can see I can look at someone and go, oh well, they've obviously tightened up that bit too much and this bit they haven't done, and the rest of the population will look at it and go, well, that patient doesn't look right. That person now looks like someone's never walked the earth before.
Well, there are some people as well, when they have their eyes lifted, they almost border on looking oriental because they've actually had them lifted so much. I mean, Roseanne Barr, comedian Roseanne Barr, American comedian, was a great example of that, where she had so much plastic surgery, her eyes went sort of so far back that they'd lost that kind of European look and started to look, more Asian, I guess, in appearance. What do you think of procedures that aren't necessarily plastic surgery, but Botox and that kind of thing? Because there's a lot of question marks over the regulation over that. And I think there's a lot of plastic surgeons that are very concerned about who is carrying out Botox. Because whereas you've gone through years of training, you're used to injections and fillers and needles and that kind of stuff. Some of these beauty rooms that are doing them, they're not, are they?
No, I mean, I think it depends exactly what you're talking about. There are two the injectable treatments. There are two main sort of types. One is Botox, which is botulinum toxin, which is produced by a bacteria. It used to, in high amounts, causes a condition called botulism, which kills people by paralysing the muscles. Now, if you, instead of millions of units of botulinum toxin that would take to do that, the idea is that you use very small amounts, really small numbers of units, to weaken or paralyse certain muscles. So, for example, between the eyebrows, ladies often get a little frown lines going up, and it makes them look angry. So you can put a little bit of Botox in there, and it paralyses them, and they look fine. Right. And it makes a lot more difference than just putting a cream on, which doesn't generally work. Right. So that's one type of treatment, and that usually wears off after about 5 months.
So would you do Botox as well, would you?
Yeah, I could do a bit of Botox, but I mainly concentrate on the surgery. Because that's where my main
forte is.
But Botox I don't think is so much of an issue as the fillers. Okay, and the fillers are the other type of injectable treatment where you're injecting something into people's faces to sort of plump them out,
right?
If you like, to fill wrinkles.
Yeah.
Okay. Now there are different types of fillers. Some are more permanent than others, and it's the permanent ones that are the real issue, because when you inject them in, it's very difficult then to get a permanent filler out because it's permanent.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, then the face ages over gradually, and you end up with it. You can end up with it looking a bit bizarre in the future,
like clothes on a coat hanger, so the skin kind of overlaps the
or just depending on where they put it. So really, you need to have fairly, probably be trained quite well to know where to put it and go through various training things. And certainly the Keogh report, which is what you're alluding to, the recent report, puts in some recommendations to try to make sure these things, for example, some of the fillers are made prescription-only medicines, because at the minute they're not. You don't prescribe them; anyone can get them and then inject them as a sort of medical.
Stay with me, if you would, for a couple more minutes. If anyone's got a question for Graham, I've got a text that's come in and I'll read you out very shortly. That's from Donna. But if anyone's got a question for Graham, 0116 251 1049, text it on 81333, and Graham will be back with us in just 1 second after the latest news headlines.
BBC Radio Leicester.
Travel news for Leicestershire.
BBC Radio Leicester.
I'll start email.
Be part of it.
BBC Radio Leicester.
At 12:35, Graham Offer, a consultant plastic surgeon at Leicester Royal Infirmary, is still in the studio with us. He's here for a couple more minutes. I've got a couple more questions to ask him. But let's put a question to you that's coming from Donna, who's texted in on 81333. She started a message with the word Leicester. She says, Graham, can you have fat put into the face? I have tried filler, but it wasn't for me. I'm 47, says Donna.
Okay. Fat is used for injecting as what's called a fat graft. So there's a guy called Sidney Coleman in America. He pioneered this. What you do is you suck fat out from one part of the body. You then process it, spin it down in a little centrifuge whilst the patient is usually asleep, and then you inject it in very small amounts with fine needles. Now, it's mainly used for reconstructive purposes. So a few years ago, I reconstructed someone's whole face using this, where they had a fat wasting condition.
Oh, gosh.
And they basically lost all their cheeks, and they looked pretty much skeletal. And you inject it in small amounts, and you can bulk out certain areas. Now, it can take several goes to work because the fat doesn't always take, which means when you inject it, it needs to grow a blood supply and stay in an area, and it can go a bit lumpy.
Right.
So at the minute, it's a very good reconstructive option. For cosmetic work, people are doing it, but it's more. I suppose it's quite a new thing to start doing for cosmetic stuff. So there are people that are doing it, but again, you've got to think very carefully about this sort of stuff, and and who you go to. It's probably where you'd probably need to go to. You couldn't have it done in a sort of clinic. You'd have to go and see a surgeon for that, really.
Now, you seem to be very smooth, which leads me to ask, have you ever had any work done?
No, I haven't. No.
Would you like to have work done at some stage? Not that I think you need.
That's an interesting thing. I think I'd consider having my upper lids done if they started getting really loose.
Say it doesn't look like
no. I think George Clooney had that done. But I'm not in George Clooney's league, as you can tell by looking at it.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he wasn't before he started having a bit of work done.
But apparently that's what I heard. So.
And as a surgeon, as someone who is a consultant plastic surgeon, do you get friends of yours saying to you all the time, "Oh, Graham, have a look at this. Shall I have this? Shall I have this lifted? Shall I have that?" Do you get family saying, can you
I get people asking me questions about things, and saying, "What can you do? What can be done about this?" and things.
Do you get a bit bored with that at parties and things like that when you say, "I'm a plastic surgeon"? They go, "Oh wow, well I want to have these lifted. I want to have that tucked behind my ear."
Actually, people do ask, and if you introduce to someone, I tend to just say, "Oh, I'm a doctor. I'm a surgeon," because if you say you're a plastic surgeon, then you do get a lot of questions about, "Oh, that's interesting."
Yeah, immediately people want to start showing you scars and asking if they can have them removed and all that kind of stuff.
I think. Yeah.
Well, it is fascinating, and you know, I think perhaps the most rewarding is probably still those cases of people who, through no fault of their own, their appearance is perhaps out of line with what we might stand as, say is a common face, a common standard setup, and changing them must be incredibly rewarding. Or likewise as well, people who've been so down and so depressed through their looks, that must be very rewarding as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's wonderful as a surgeon, because it's what you do for one person, and it has an immediate effect on that one person, and it's really nice to do it. Well, I really love it.
I think I'm all right at the moment, but if I start to see the laughter lines become far too hilarious, I will be in touch. Nice to see you, Graham. Thank you so much for coming in. My guest, Graham Offer, a consulting plastic surgeon at Leicester Royal Infirmary. It's 20 minutes to 1. Rupa Rajani on the way shortly to tell us what she's got coming up in her show at 1. But before that, here's Barbara Streisand.